Good morning, all. Aloha, as we say in Hawaii. Good to be with you. My voice is a little shaky here, but so bear with me. Thank you so much, Ben, for your really kind remarks. They say if you want to know how to run a balanced budget government, ask a mayor. Mayors have to go about things very immediately. Mayors have to go about things on a, for the most part, nonpartisan basis. So you find the best people in government running balanced budgets are mayors. And so it's great to partner with Ben. And I say welcome to you from our Blue Dog Coalition. Of course, the Blue Dogs are Democrats, but I will tell you that not one Blue Dog considers this to be a partisan issue. Not one Blue Dog takes this from a D versus R perspective. In fact, we're all about making this a bipartisan, nonpartisan issue, because we think that's the only way to get this done. You know, there was a very telling and relevant opinion in The Hill yesterday by Brian Riedel of the Manhattan Institute. The title is Why Washington Won't Address Soaring Deficits. And I'm just going to read you some passages because I think they're very relevant to the discussion today. Seemingly no one cares about the budget deficit anymore. Republicans recently cut taxes by $2 trillion, while Democrats are promising a spending spree that could top $40 trillion over the decade. And this is on top of the current budget trajectory that shows annual deficits exceeding $2 trillion within a decade and totaling a staggering $84 trillion over the next 30 years. The cost of paying interest on this debt is projected to become the largest federal expenditure within a few decades, consuming 1/3 of all federal taxes. Even that assumes continued low interest rates. Every percentage point that rise adds another $13 trillion in budget interest costs over the next 3 decades. In short, an avalanche of debt is upon us, yet pandering politicians promise even more free lunches paid for by our kids. The article goes on to analyze what Congress and the President have done about budget deficits. Not the first time we've been in this situation. And there have been times in our history that we've been called upon to do a grand deal, where we just collectively said enough is enough and let's try to dig ourselves out of this. And the author analyzes, I think it was about 14 of such budget deals over the past decades, and concludes that some of those failed and some of those succeeded wildly, by the way. So we have been able to do this before. And he basically concludes that there are 3 factors that go into success of a budget deal when we say enough is enough. The first is that there has to be what he calls a penalty default. In other words, there has to be a consequence to not running a balanced budget. There has to be a consequence that makes you say, well, no, the balanced budget is the way to go because the other way is going to be worse. The third is that you have to be engaged in good faith negotiations, not only within Congress, but also with the President. This has to be an all-around negotiation. But the second one is the one I want to focus on. He says here, the public must want a deficit reduction deal. The budget deals enacted between '85 and '97, which helped balance the budget, were driven by voter deficit concerns that made it politically safer for politicians to do a budget deal. Today, most voters either do not care about the deficit or are willing to address it in only a partisan fashion. Why shouldn't voters think that? Because their government is telling them that deficits don't matter. Their government is saying to them, don't worry about the debt. We can handle that as a percentage of, GDP or any measure that you can come by in the economic world. Don't worry about debt. We know instinctively that that's wrong. However, when a succession of presidents says, don't worry about it, and a succession of Congresses on both sides of the aisle not only say don't worry about it, but then act as if it's no big deal, you start to be thinking as a voter that it's no big deal. And pretty soon you find yourself in a really, really deep hole, which is where we're headed right now. So the critical question to ask ourselves is, why does debt matter? Why does debt matter? Why should we be concerned about deficits and debt? Why should we get ourselves to the perspective of saying, no, this really, really matters? These are very insidious concepts, really. Insidious, I mean that it takes a long time for them to catch up with you in many cases. And so you can actually ignore them for a long time. But as you ignore them, as you allow them to get worse, all of a sudden they catch up with you very, 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 very fast. And that's what we are trying to avoid here. And that's what we are trying to avoid. And that starts within Congress, because voters listen to us. If we're telling them don't worry about it, we can cut taxes and increase spending, then why shouldn't I believe that? That's what I want. I don't want to have to face some of these tough choices. So today's panel is about Why does debt matter? And the goal of today's panel is to educate you and to get you to be advocates within your offices, within your constituencies, within your communities, for why this is an important issue, because the next result is when people do believe that it matters, then they're willing to do something about it. Thank you.